In the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, summer of 1862, a tragedy unfolded that would have normally been recorded as just another statistic in the violent history of the American frontier. The ruthless attack on the Richardson-Cooper wagon train left 23 people dead in Vulture Canyon. At least, that's what the military scouts reported after counting bodies strewn across the blood-soaked valley floor. But what they failed to discover were 12-year-old Hannah and 9-year-old Sarah Cooper, two sisters who fled the massacre and found refuge in a hidden mountain cave high above Shadow Falls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Their remarkable story of survival against impossible odds remained buried for decades, preserved only in a leather journal, scattered tribal accounts, and eventually historical records in the Colorado Territory archives. This is the forgotten saga of how two young girls endured the wild through harsh seasons, and how the wisdom and protection of a lone Cheyenne hunter named Tall Feather gave them a second chance when the world had already written their obituaries. The Cooper family had every reason to feel hopeful as their wagon rolled through the lush valley that peaceful July morning in 1862. The majestic Colorado mountains formed a stunning backdrop against the clear blue sky, and wildflowers painted the meadows in splashes of yellow, purple, and red, nature's welcome to their journey toward a promising future. Thomas Cooper, a skilled blacksmith from Pennsylvania, led his wife Margaret and their two daughters westward, following reports of gold strikes and growing settlements near Pikes Peak. The Coopers had joined the Richardson wagon train 4 weeks earlier at Fort Lyon, a convoy 12 wagons strong, filled with families pursuing similar dreams of prosperity in the booming Colorado Territory. The Richardson party was led by Vernon Richardson, a veteran frontiersman who had made the crossing twice before and was known for his careful planning and cautious nature. 12-year-old Hannah Cooper sat perched on a wooden crate at the back of their wagon, her legs swinging freely as she sketched the mountain landscapes in a leather-bound journal, a birthday gift from her father. With charcoal and occasionally watercolors, she documented their journey west with remarkable detail for a child her age. Unlike many children on the arduous journey who complained of monotony, Hannah found wonder in recording their adventures, filling page after page with drawings of rock formations, unusual wildlife, and the ever-changing terrain they encountered. "Hannah, keep an eye on your sister," Margaret called from within the wagon, where she was organizing their midday provisions. 9-year-old Sarah was known for wandering off, enchanted by butterflies and prairie flowers that lured her away from the safety of the caravan. The younger Cooper girl possessed an unusual connection to nature that both delighted and worried her parents. She could identify birds just by the flutter of their wings and seemed to sense weather changes before anyone else noticed the shifting clouds. "Look, Hannah!" Sarah pointed toward a towering rock formation where water cascaded down into a forested valley below. "The water looks like it's dancing on the mountain." Hannah glanced up from her journal. "Shadow Falls," she read from the map her father had shown them that morning. "Mr. Richardson says we'll camp near there tonight before we start climbing through Vulture Pass tomorrow." The sisters watched as the magnificent waterfall grew larger as they approached, its mist creating ephemeral rainbows in the afternoon sunlight. Neither girl could have imagined that this natural wonder would soon become their salvation. The Richardson wagon train had been explicitly warned to avoid Vulture Canyon altogether. Captain Wallace at Fort Lyon had sternly cautioned them about increasing raids by the notorious Blackwell Gang, a vicious collection of deserters, outlaws, and fugitives who had formed a ruthless band known as the Vulture Raiders for their habit of picking clean what remained after their attacks. "They target wagon trains and supply convoys almost weekly now," the captain had warned during their stopover. "The northern route adds 5 days to your journey but virtually guarantees your safety." Vernon Richardson had initially accepted this advice, but when a trader arrived with news of a rockslide that had made parts of the northern route impassable, Richardson called for a council among the families. "The Vulture Canyon route saves us nearly a week," Richardson argued during their evening meeting. "Every report suggests the Blackwell gang has moved further south after that last cavalry patrol came through." Thomas Cooper had voiced strong opposition. That night, his voice carrying across the campfire. "5 extra days means nothing if it ensures my family's safety," he insisted, his hand protectively on Margaret's shoulder. "I've heard too many stories about Blackwell's men to risk my daughters on that route." "Then travel alone if you're so." "Afraid," Edmund Parker, a banker from St. Louis with 2 wagons of merchandise, had retorted. "Some of us have investments waiting that can't be delayed by another week of mountain travel." The vote had gone in favor of the Vulture Canyon route. 8 families to 4. Thomas Cooper reluctantly agreed to continue with the group, knowing that traveling alone would pose even greater dangers for his wife and daughters. It was a decision that would haunt his final moments. As the wagon train approached the narrow entrance to Vulture Canyon, an unnatural silence fell over the landscape. The constant twitter of birds that had accompanied their journey suddenly ceased. Even the insects grew quiet, leaving only the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort of oxen to break the stillness. Sarah noticed it first. "Papa," she whispered, tugging at her father's sleeve as he walked alongside their wagon. The birds stopped singing. Thomas Cooper immediately tensed, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. He had served briefly in the Pennsylvania militia and recognized the warning signs of an ambush. "Vernon," he called toward the lead wagon where Richardson rode. "Hold up, something's not right." But his warning came too late. The first shot rang out from the rocky ridges above, striking one of the oxen pulling the Parker family's lead wagon. Then came the thunderous sound of hoofbeats as riders emerged from concealed positions among the boulders flanking the canyon. "Entrance! Raiders!" Richardson shouted. "Circle the wagons!" Chaos erupted as families scrambled to form a defensive position, but the narrow confines of the canyon entrance made the maneuver nearly impossible. Women grabbed children and pulled them into wagons, while men reached for weapons. Thomas Cooper acted with the decisive clarity of someone who had anticipated this moment. "Under the wagon," he ordered Hannah and Sarah. "Stay there no matter what happens." The girls scrambled beneath the wagon bed as their father grabbed his rifle and took position at the front wheel. Margaret Cooper, showing remarkable composure, passed ammunition to her husband from the relative cover of the wagon's interior. "If anything happens," Thomas called to his daughters as he reloaded, "run for Shadow Falls. Follow the creek up to the high caves we saw from the ridge. Hide there and don't come out until it's safe." Hannah nodded solemnly, clutching her younger sister's hand with white-knuckled intensity. Through gaps between the wagon wheels, she watched in horror as raiders in dusty clothes and bandanas circled. The beleaguered caravan, the memories of what followed, would haunt Hannah's dreams for years to come. Fragmented images of violence too horrific for a child to fully comprehend. She saw Mr. Parker fall beside his wagon, saw Mrs. Richardson clutching her infant son as she ran for cover, only to collapse mid-stride. When a raider's bullet splintered the wagon wheel beside them, Thomas Cooper made a desperate decision. "Girls, run now!" he shouted above the gunfire. "Head for the falls like I told you! Go!" Hannah pulled Sarah from beneath the wagon, and together they sprinted toward the tree line, hearts pounding in their ears. Neither dared look back, even when they heard their mother's scream cut through the chaos behind them. "Don't stop!" Hannah gasped as Sarah stumbled on the uneven ground. "We have to keep going." The sisters ran as they'd never run before, driven by pure survival instinct. The distant thunder of Shadow Falls grew louder as they approached, its massive curtain of water now representing their only hope. Behind them, the sounds of violence began to fade, replaced by the ominous whoops of the raiders celebrating their Victory! They reached the base of Shadow Falls as the sun dipped below the western ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. The waterfall roared before them, a 70-foot cascade plunging into a deep pool surrounded by moss-covered boulders. There, Hannah spotted a narrow game trail visible along the cliff face, partially hidden by the waterfall's spray. "We can climb up there," she pointed to the trail. "It might lead to the caves Papa mentioned." Holding hands, the sisters carefully picked their way across slippery stones. The waterfall's mist soaked their calico dresses as they began the treacherous climb. The game trail was barely visible in places, forcing them to press their bodies against the cliff face as they inched upward. After 20 minutes of terrifying ascent, the trail widened into a natural shelf that curved behind the waterfall. To Hannah's surprise and relief, the shelf led to exactly what her father had described, a cave entrance hidden from the valley below by the curtain of rushing water. The opening was small, but large enough for the girls to slip through one at a time. Inside, the cave opened up into a space roughly the size of their wagon, dry and protected from the elements. Late afternoon light filtered through the waterfall, casting ethereal blue patterns on the stone walls. Wet, terrified, and exhausted, Hannah pulled Sarah into a tight embrace as they huddled against the back wall of their newfound sanctuary. The roar of the falls masked their sobs as the full horror of what they had witnessed began to settle into their young minds. "Mama and Papa will find us," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the thundering water. "They know where we are." Hannah said nothing, stroking her sister's hair as darkness gradually filled their cave. She was old enough to understand what they had witnessed, wise enough to recognize the terrible truth that no one would be coming for them. As the first stars appeared in the narrow slice of sky, visible through the cave entrance, Hannah Cooper faced the grim reality that she and her sister were now alone in the wilderness, miles from the nearest settlement, with winter only months away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What neither girl realized as they huddled together for warmth was that they were being watched. From the ridge above the falls, keen eyes had observed their flight and desperate climb to safety, eyes that belonged neither to raider nor to cavalry, scout, but to someone who walked between worlds. Tallfeather, a solitary Cheyenne hunter who'd been tracking elk when the distant sounds of gunfire drew his attention to Vulture Canyon. As the Cooper sisters drifted into uneasy sleep in their hidden cave, Tallfeather made his own plans. The old ways taught that such meetings were not chance but destiny. The Great Spirit had placed these children in his path for a purpose. By first light, he would discover what that purpose might be. Dawn broke over Shadow Falls with a palette of pink and gold streaking across the sky. Hannah Cooper awoke first, momentarily disoriented by the sound of rushing water and the hard stone beneath her. Reality crashed back as she felt Sarah's small form curled against her side, her sister's face peaceful in sleep despite the trauma of the previous day. Hannah carefully extracted herself and moved to the edge of their cave sanctuary. Through the shimmering curtain of water, she surveyed the valley below, searching for any sign of movement, raiders, or perhaps, by some miracle, survivors from their wagon train. The landscape appeared eerily serene, betraying no evidence of yesterday's violence from this distance. Her stomach clenched with hunger. They had fled without food, without supplies, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, Hannah's journal tucked securely in her dress pocket, and the small knife her father had given her for her 12th birthday. If they were to survive, she would need to venture out and find something to eat. "Sarah," she whispered, gently shaking her sister, "I need to look for food. You must stay hidden. Don't come out unless I call for you." Sarah blinked awake, fear instantly flooding her eyes. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, grabbing Hannah's arm. "I won't go far," Hannah promised, "but we need to eat. Remember how Papa taught us to stay quiet when hunting? That's what I need you to do now." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded. Hannah squeezed her sister's hand reassuringly before carefully navigating back out to the narrow ledge beside the waterfall. She followed the game trail further upward, away from the falls, reasoning that it would be safer to explore the ridge above rather than return to the valley where raiders might still be present. The trail eventually leveled out onto a wooded plateau above the falls. Hannah scanned the area for anything edible. Near the edge of a small clearing, she spotted a cluster of bushes laden with small, dark berries. Her heart leaped, sustenance within reach. She had taken just 3 steps toward them when a voice spoke directly behind her. "Those berries bring sickness and death to the stomach." Hannah whirled around, nearly losing her balance on the rocky ground. Standing not 10 feet away was a tall, indigenous man. His copper face was marked with 2 parallel red lines across. His cheekbones and his long black hair was adorned with a single eagle feather. He wore a fringed buckskin shirt and leggings, and carried a bow slung across his back alongside a quiver of arrows. Hannah froze, her father's warnings about hostile tribes flooding her mind. Yet the man made no move toward her, his stance calm and open. He simply pointed at the berry bush she had been approaching. "Death berries," he said again in accented but clear English. "These are better." He reached into a small pouch at his waist and extended a handful of different berries, deep purple in color. Hannah remained motionless, torn between desperate hunger and fear. The stories she'd heard in Pennsylvania depicted indigenous people as savages, but her father had always challenged such notions, insisting that most tribes were peaceful unless provoked. During their journey west, Thomas Cooper had traded fairly with several tribal members they'd encountered. The man seemed to read her thoughts. "I am the tall feather of the Tsitsistas, the Cheyenne people. I mean no harm to children." He placed the berries on a flat stone between them and stepped back, giving Hannah space. After a moment's hesitation, Hannah inched forward and grabbed the berries. They were sweet and tangy, instantly easing the hollow ache in her stomach. "There is another child," Tall Feather stated matter-of-factly. Hannah stiffened. "My sister," she admitted cautiously. "Sarah." Tall Feather nodded. "The Blackwell raiders have gone, but others will come soon. Men in blue coats who ask many questions. You cannot stay here." "Soldiers?" Hannah asked, hope flickering. "They could help us get to Pike's Peak. Our uncle is expecting us there." The hunter's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a depth of knowledge that made Hannah uncomfortable. Pike's Peak is a journey of many days' journey. Winter comes early to these mountains. 2 small ones would not survive alone. The brutal truth of their situation settled over Hannah like a heavy blanket. Their parents were gone. They had no supplies, no weapons, and no knowledge of this territory. Even if they could somehow reach the nearest settlement, what awaited them there? An orphanage? Separation? "I have camp." Tall Feather pointed toward the distant trees where wisps of morning mist clung to the pine forest. "My shelter has food, warmth, safety. You and small sister can stay until the snow melts." Hannah hesitated, weighing impossible options. Trust this stranger from a people she had been taught to fear, or face certain death in the wilderness. "I need to speak with Sarah," she said finally. Tall Feather nodded and settled cross-legged on a boulder, his patience suggesting he was accustomed to waiting. Hannah returned to the cave behind the waterfall, where Sarah had pressed herself against the wall, clearly having heard voices. "Who is he?" Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "His name is Tall Feather. He's Cheyenne," Hannah explained, offering some of the berries. "He says the raiders are gone, but soldiers will come soon. He's offered to take us to his camp until spring." Sarah chewed thoughtfully. "Is he a good person?" The simple question reflected their father's teachings. Thomas Cooper had always told his daughters to trust their instincts about people rather than appearances or rumors. "I think so," Hannah said slowly. "He could have hurt me, but instead gave me food, and he knew you were here, but didn't try to find you." Sarah nodded, her young face solemn with trust in her older sister's judgment. "Papa said, if we're ever lost, we should find help from people who know the land." Hannah felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Their very survival hinged on this decision. After a moment, she nodded resolutely. "We'll go with him, but we'll be careful." When the sisters emerged from behind Shadow Falls, Tallfeather remained where Hannah had left him, sorting through plants in a small deerskin pouch with weathered but nimble fingers. He looked up, his dark eyes assessing Sarah with the same penetrating gaze he had given Hannah. "Small one has a strong spirit," he remarked cryptically, then stood with the fluid grace of someone entirely at home in the wilderness. "Come, we walk far today." "Wait," Hannah said, suddenly remembering. "We need to see our parents first." Tallfeather's expression softened slightly. "The dead are with the spirits now, only bodies remain. But I understand. We will go." He led them along a hidden trail that skirted the main canyon, keeping to the shadows of the forest edge. After an hour of careful walking, they reached a ridge overlooking the scene of the ambush. Hannah instinctively covered Sarah's eyes as they peered down at the valley below. The wagons remained where they had been attacked, some burned to charred frames. Bodies lay where they had fallen, though at this distance individual features were mercifully indistinguishable. Raiders had clearly looted everything of value before departing. "Our parents," Hannah whispered. "We should bury them." Tallfeather shook his head gently. "Blue coats come today or tomorrow. They will do this task. We cannot be seen. Raiders sometimes leave watchers." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, but nodded in reluctant agreement. The practical necessity of survival overrode even this most basic act of respect for their parents. Sarah buried her face against Hannah's side, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Tallfeather allowed them a few minutes of grief before speaking again. "We honor the dead by living well," he said simply. "Your parents' spirits know. You remember them?" With one last look at the valley where their old life had ended, Hannah turned away, guiding Sarah to follow Tallfeather deeper into the forest. Their journey to the Cheyenne's camp took the remainder of the day, winding through ravines and across streams that Hannah suspected were deliberate choices to mask their trail. By late afternoon, when Sarah's steps had begun to falter with exhaustion, they reached a small clearing nestled against a cliff face. A conical tipi stood partially built into the rock wall itself, nearly invisible among the surrounding pines unless one knew exactly where to look. A small smoke hole at the top released thin wisps into the air, promising warmth inside. "We are here," Tallfeather announced. "Eagle's Rock." The interior of Tallfeather's dwelling surprised the girls. Rather than the primitive conditions Hannah had expected, they found a space that was both orderly and comfortable. A central fire pit provided heat, while smoke escaped through a cleverly designed flue. Woven mats covered the packed earth floor, and shelves carved directly into the rock wall held an impressive array of containers, dried plants, and mysterious bundles. Tallfeather directed the exhausted sisters to a pile of soft furs in one corner. "Rest now, food soon." Hannah kept a protective arm around Sarah as they settled onto the makeshift bed, too tired to maintain their wariness. The gentle crackling of the fire and the earthy scent of herbs hanging from the rafters created an unexpected sense of security. Despite their circumstances, both girls fell into deep sleep within minutes. When they awoke, twilight had descended outside. Tallfeather sat by the fire, stirring a clay pot that emitted a rich, savory aroma. Without speaking, he ladled stew. into wooden bowls and placed them before the sisters, along with carved wooden spoons. The meal, a hearty mixture of venison, wild onions, and unfamiliar roots, was the first substantial food they'd had since before the attack. Hannah watched carefully as Sarah took her first tentative sips, then began eating herself when her sister showed no hesitation. As they ate, Tall Feather studied them with those penetrating eyes. "You have questions," he stated. Hannah nodded, suddenly finding her voice. "Why are you helping us?" The hunter's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps approval at the direct question. "Many winters ago, a white doctor saved my son when fever nearly took him to the spirit world," he said. "The Great Spirit teaches balance in all things. Now I help white children. Will you take us to Pike's Peak when spring comes?" Hannah asked. Tall Feather was silent for a long moment. "If that is your path," he said finally, "but winter is long in these mountains. Many moons will pass before snow melts. You will learn much before then." "Learn what?" Sarah spoke up for the first time since entering the dwelling. A hint of a smile touched the hunter's lips. "How to survive, how to hear what the wind tells you, how to see what others cannot." His gaze lingered on Sarah. "Some things you already know without learning." Hannah didn't fully understand the Cheyenne's words, but an unfamiliar sensation had begun to replace her overwhelming fear. A tentative glimmer of hope. They were alive, they had shelter, they had found someone who, for whatever reason, seemed committed to their survival. As darkness settled completely outside Eagle's Rock, Tall Feather hung a tanned hide over the entrance and added wood to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere that felt strangely separate from the world of violence they had fled. "Tomorrow," the Cheyenne said as he arranged additional furs for the sisters to use as blankets, "we begin." What exactly they were beginning, Hannah wasn't certain. But as she watched Sarah's eyelids grow heavy beside her, she realized that their lives had been irrevocably divided into before and after. Everything familiar was gone. Their very survival now depended on adapting to this new reality, learning from this enigmatic man who had appeared when they needed him most. Outside, an owl called 3 times, a sound that would have meant nothing to Hannah yesterday, but now seemed laden with significance in this strange new world they had entered. The first week with Tall Feather tested every ounce of the Cooper sisters' resilience. The Cheyenne maintained a schedule as unwavering as the rising sun, waking them before dawn each day for what he called their new education. "Different learning now," he explained on their third morning as Hannah reluctantly opened her eyes to the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the smoke hole. "Not books, not numbers. Learning that keeps your breath in your body when the world turns harsh." Hannah had always excelled in her formal schooling back in Pennsylvania, taking pride in her neat penmanship and quick calculations. This new curriculum challenged everything she understood about education. Each morning began with gathering: plants for food, plants for medicine, plants for crafting tools and implements. Tall Feather's knowledge seemed limitless as he guided them through forests and meadows, providing names in both English and Cheyenne for each discovery. "This is an arrowroot," he instructed, indicating a plant with slender leaves. "Stops bleeding, fights fever. Remember its face. Remember where it chooses to grow." Hannah dutifully recorded these lessons in her journal each evening, creating detailed drawings alongside Tall Feather's teachings. Sarah, meanwhile, displayed an uncanny ability to remember the location of every plant they encountered, often finding specimens more quickly than even Tall Feather himself. "Small one has earth eyes," the hunter remarked with rare approval when Sarah unerringly led them to a patch of rare golden seal hidden among fallen logs. "She sees beneath what others see," The afternoons focused on preparation and preservation. Tall Feather showed the girls how to dry herbs properly, how to extract essential oils, how to prepare poultices and tinctures. Their small hands grew increasingly confident with the mortar and pestle, grinding seeds and roots to fine powders under the Cheyenne's watchful eye. "Why must we learn all this?" Hannah asked one afternoon as they hung bundles of mint from the rafters. "Won't we be returning to Pike's Peak in spring?" Tall Feather's weathered hands continued their methodical work as he answered. "Knowledge never burdens shoulders. What eyes have seen and hands have learned stays forever." He secured another bundle before adding, "Path ahead is not always what we expect." By the end of their first week, blisters had formed and broken on Hannah's soft hands, replaced gradually by the beginnings of calluses. Muscles unaccustomed to such labor ached each night as the sisters collapsed onto their fur bedding. Yet amid the physical challenges, Hannah noticed subtle changes in Sarah. Her normally reticent sister laughed more freely, walked more confidently, and even spoke directly to Tall Feather without first looking to Hannah for permission. The second week brought new lessons. Tall Feather led them deeper into the forest, teaching them to identify animal tracks and understand the stories written in disturbed foliage and bent grasses. "Deer passed here before morning light," he demonstrated, pointing to distinctive hoofprints partially obscured by fallen leaves. "Two, mother and young one. Not running, not afraid." Hannah struggled to see these distinctions, but Sarah absorbed the teachings with natural intuition. By week's end, the younger Cooper could differentiate between raccoon and fox tracks, could tell which direction a bird had flown based on disturbed branches, could even estimate how recently an animal had passed by, examining the clarity of its prints. "Sisters learn differently," Tall Feather observed one evening as they prepared dinner, a stew made from roots, dried venison and wild onions. "Tall one learns here," he tapped his temple. "Small one learns here." His hand moved to his chest. Above his heart, Hannah understood the assessment immediately. Her approach had always been methodical, analytical, the same way she had approached her schoolbooks. Sarah's understanding seemed to emerge from a deeper, more instinctive place. The third week brought their first encounter with outsiders since the ambush. Hannah was practicing fire starting using a bow drill Tall Feather had crafted for her, a frustrating task that had left her with nothing but blistered palms and smoldering tinder, when the Cheyenne suddenly stiffened. "Inside," he commanded, his voice urgent but controlled. The sisters obeyed instantly, retreating into Eagle's Rock, while Tall Feather quickly scattered their practice materials and partially covered the smoke hole. Through a small gap in the hide covering the entrance, Hannah watched as the hunter casually gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, appearing to anyone passing by as simply attending to daily chores. Minutes later, Hannah heard what had alerted Tall Feather, the distant sound of horses approaching, followed by male voices. From her limited vantage point, she caught glimpses of blue uniforms as a cavalry patrol passed less than 100 yards from Eagle's Rock. "Those men could help us," Hannah whispered to Sarah, a flicker of their former life momentarily rekindling. "Tall Feather says we must not be seen," Sarah responded firmly, surprising Hannah with her conviction. "Bluecoats bring more bluecoats, questions without end." The soldiers passed without incident, never noticing the nearly invisible dwelling or its occupants. When Tall Feather returned inside, he found Hannah unusually quiet, lost in thoughts of the world beyond their forest sanctuary. "You think of going with them," the Cheyenne stated. "Not a question, but an observation," Hannah nodded hesitantly. "They could take us to Pike's Peak, to civilization." Tall Feather settled beside the central fire, adding a handful of dried herbs that filled the dwelling with a calming aroma. "What is this civilization?" he asked. "Place where children learn many words from books but cannot feed themselves when hungry?" place where people forget how to hear trees speaking before a storm. Comes. It's where we belong, Hannah insisted, though with less certainty than she'd intended. We're not Cheyenne. No, Tallfeather agreed, but belonging is not only about where we are born. He fixed Hannah with those penetrating eyes. 4 moons. Still come before the mountain passes clear. Much learning remains. Then you decide. As autumn deepened toward winter, the tempo of their education intensified. Tallfeather taught them to create snowshoes from flexible branches and rawhide, to identify which trees would burn even when wet, to read weather patterns in cloud formations and wind direction. Hannah's journal is filled with page after page of survival knowledge, detailed drawings of edible plants alongside toxic lookalikes, step-by-step instructions for building shelters, methods for purifying water, techniques for preserving meat and produce. What had begun as simply recording Tallfeather's teachings had evolved into a comprehensive wilderness survival manual. The first snow fell in early November, transforming their forest home into a winter wonderland that delighted Sarah but worried Hannah. The pristine white blanket represented both beauty and danger. Game would become scarcer, travel more difficult, and the cold a constant threat. Tallfeather marked this transition by teaching them a new skill: storytelling. Each evening after dinner, he would share tales from Cheyenne tradition, legends that explained natural phenomena, honored ancestors, or taught moral lessons. The stories, delivered in his melodic voice with occasional phrases in his native tongue, transported the sisters away from their hardships into realms of animal spirits, clever tricksters, and ancient wisdom. "Why do you tell us these stories?" Hannah asked one night after a particularly vivid tale about how the coyote brought fire to humankind. "Stories are more than entertainment," Tallfeather replied. "They are vessels that carry knowledge across time. When the body is cold and belly empty, stories feed the spirit. Strong spirit helps the body endure." Gradually, he encouraged the sisters to share their own stories, memories of their parents, accounts of life in Pennsylvania, descriptions of celebrations and traditions from their former world. These sessions became a form of healing, allowing the girls to preserve their history while processing their grief. In late November, as winter tightened its grip on the mountains, Tallfeather announced a change in their routine. "Today we begin medicine work," he declared one morning, directing them to arrange specific herbs, minerals, and tools on a woven mat beside the fire. "I'm not sure we should," Hannah hesitated, memories of Sunday sermons condemning heathen practices surfacing. In her mind, "Your father is not here," Tallfeather interrupted, his tone gentler than his words. "But his daughters live because I know plants that heal, know how the body works, know ways to fight sickness before it grows strong." Hannah glanced at Sarah, who waited expectantly, apparently unbothered by these new teachings. With reluctant curiosity, Hannah joined them by the fire. Tallfeather began with the fundamentals: which plants reduce fever, which soothed coughs, which fought infection, which reduced swelling. He showed them how to determine proper dosages, how to combine elements for stronger effects, how to prepare medicines in forms that could be stored for future use. "Everyone carries healing power," he explained, as he guided Sarah's small hands in grinding willow bark for a pain-relieving tea. "Some louder than others. Small one has a strong medicine voice inside her." Hannah noticed how naturally these skills came to her sister. Sarah mixed preparations with confident motions, selected herbs without hesitation, and even began anticipating Tallfeather's instructions before they were given. The bond forming between the youngest Cooper and the Cheyenne hunter transcended their differences in age, language, and culture, a connection built on shared intuition. As the winter deepened, the Cooper sisters found themselves transformed. In ways neither could have imagined, on that terrible day they fled the wagon train massacre. In the shelter of Eagle's Rock, under Tailfeather's patient guidance, they were becoming something entirely new, neither fully of their old world nor of their new one, but stronger for straddling both. Winter solstice arrived, marked by the year's shortest day and longest night. Tailfeather prepared a special meal using the last of the autumn's preserved elk meat, dried chokecherries, and pine nut flour, a feast unlike anything the girls had experienced since arriving at Eagle's Rock. "Today is sacred night," he explained, as he carefully arranged the food in specific patterns on wooden platters. "When light begins its journey back to the world." The Cheyenne painted small symbols on the girls' foreheads with a mixture of red, ochre and bear fat, protection markings, he explained, to guard them through the darkest season. That night, as howling winds drove snow against their shelter, Tailfeather performed a ceremony unlike anything the sisters had witnessed. He beat a small hand drum, sang in his native language, and cast various herbs into the fire, creating aromatic smoke that filled the dwelling. "This is how we honor Turning Point," he told them. "From now, days grow longer, light returns slowly. We celebrate survival halfway through winter's test." Hannah watched with a mixture of fascination and lingering discomfort, her Pennsylvania upbringing at odds with these unfamiliar rituals. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of peace that settled over Eagle's Rock as Tailfeather's songs drifted into the winter night. Later, as Sarah slept soundly beside her, Hannah wrote in her journal, "By firelight." Her entry that night differed from the practical knowledge she typically recorded. December 21st, 1862, winter solstice. Tailfeather says this is the heart of darkness before light begins its return. "I realize today that we have been with him for nearly 6 months. I barely recognize my hands anymore. They are stronger, calloused, capable of creating fire, preparing medicine, and building shelter. Sometimes I struggle to remember our house in Pennsylvania, mother's face, father's voice. Does this mean I'm forgetting who I am, or discovering who I can become?" Outside, an owl called 3 times. The same messenger whose voice had marked their first night at Eagle's Rock. Hannah now understood this was the great horned owl, Tailfeather's spirit helper who watched over their hidden home. The sound no longer frightened her, but instead brought comfort, another sign of how profoundly her perception had shifted in the months since Shadow Falls. January brought the harshest weather the Cooper sisters had ever experienced. Snow drifts piled higher than Eagle's Rock itself, transforming the forest into an alien landscape of white mounds and ice-laden branches. Temperatures plummeted so severely that Tailfeather taught them to recognize the distinctive crack of trees splitting from internal frost, a sound like distant gunfire that initially triggered traumatic memories of the ambush. "Cold brings greatest danger, but also greatest teaching," Tailfeather explained as he demonstrated how to layer clothing for maximum warmth. "Body must learn to be efficient. No wasted movement, no wasted heat." Their daily routine adapted to winter's constraints. Outside excursions became shorter but more intense, focused on maintaining their hunting trap lines and gathering the few medicinal plants that remained accessible beneath the snow. Inside Eagle's Rock, they devoted hours to crafting tools, preparing hides, and expanding their knowledge of healing. One bitterly cold morning, Hannah awoke to find Sarah's forehead burning with fever. Her sister's normally rosy cheeks had paled, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. "Tailfeather!" Hannah called out, panic edging her voice. "Sarah's sick." The Cheyenne appeared instantly at their bedside, his face betraying no alarm as he placed weathered fingers on Sarah's throat and forehead. After a moment of assessment, he nodded to himself and began gathering supplies from his extensive stores. "Lung sickness," he diagnosed. Many children are taken by this enemy in winter moons, but we fight strong. For the next 3 days, Hannah barely slept as she assisted Tall Feather in Sarah's treatment. They administered teas brewed from pine needles and balsam root, created steam inhalations with herbs traded from southern tribes, and applied chest poultices of mustard seed and clay. When Sarah's fever spiked dangerously on the second night, Tall Feather performed a healing ceremony that lasted until dawn, chanting softly while brushing an eagle feather over the child's trembling form. Hannah, watching from across the fire, found herself silently praying, not with the formal words she'd learned in church, but with desperate, instinctive pleas that bridged her old faith and new understanding. Please don't take her too. Please. Let her stay with me. On the 4th morning, Sarah's fever broke. She opened her eyes, weak but lucid, and asked for water. Hannah wept with relief as she helped her sister sip from a carved wooden cup. "You have good medicine hands," Tall Feather told Hannah later as they prepared a strengthening broth for Sarah. "Steady when fear comes. This cannot be taught." The compliment, rare from the typically reserved Cheyenne, warmed Hannah more than the fire. She had discovered something essential about herself during Sarah's illness: a capacity for calm action, a mid-crisis, a strength that emerged precisely when needed most. Sarah's recovery proved slow but steady. During her convalescence, Tall Feather introduced a new element to their education: language. He began teaching the sisters basic Cheyenne words and phrases, explaining that understanding his people's language would give them deeper access to medicinal knowledge. Hannah, with her natural aptitude for academic learning, quickly grasped vocabulary and simple sentence structures. Sarah, though still regaining her strength, showed remarkable skill with pronunciation, capturing the subtle inflections that Hannah struggled to reproduce. "Words carry power," Tall Feather explained. "Speaking of a plant's true name in old language calls its spirit more strongly into medicine." By February, heavy snows had isolated Eagle's Rock completely. Game grew increasingly scarce, testing the effectiveness of Tall Feather's food preservation methods from autumn. Their meals became simpler: dried meat reconstituted in broth, pine, needle tea for vitamin nourishment, and precious stores of dried berries and roots. On the leanest days, Tall Feather shared stories of previous winters, when conditions had been even more severe. "In my grandfather's time," he recounted one evening as they huddled near the fire, rationing small portions of pemmican. "Snow fell for 20 days without stopping. People ate boiled buckskin from inside moccasins to survive." These tales served a dual purpose: distracting the girls from their hunger while simultaneously teaching them that hardship was survivable, that human beings possessed remarkable capacity for endurance when necessary. Hannah's journal entries from this period reflected growing maturity and adaptation. February 12, 1863. "Tall Feather showed us how to snare snowshoe hares today. My first attempt failed, but my second caught a small one that will make tomorrow's stew. Strange how something that would have horrified me 6 months ago now brings such satisfaction. I remember Mother's horror when Father dressed game in our yard. Now I can skin a rabbit myself without flinching. Am I becoming someone my parents wouldn't recognize?" As February waned, an unexpected visitor arrived at Eagle's Rock. Hannah was practicing Cheyenne vocabulary while Sarah napped when Tall Feather suddenly tensed, his head lifting like a deer sensing danger. Without explanation, he extinguished their fire with a handful of sand and motioned for Hannah to wake Sarah quietly. "Someone comes," he whispered. "Not blue coats, not raiders, one man moving like Cheyenne." Minutes later, a distinctive bird call sounded outside. 3 notes repeated in a pattern Hannah recognized as a tribal identification. Tall Feather relaxed slightly and responded with a similar call before unblocking the entrance. A younger indigenous man in his 30s entered, stamping snow from his moccasins. His face registered momentary surprise at seeing the white children before he composed himself and spoke rapidly to Tall Feather in Cheyenne. "This is Running Fox," Tall Feather explained to the sisters after their brief exchange. "My cousin brings news from our people's winter camp." Running Fox studied the girls curiously as Tall Feather rekindled their fire and prepared tea. Though his expression remained neutral, Hannah sensed no hostility in his assessment, merely understandable puzzlement at finding two white children in a Cheyenne hunter's dwelling. The men conversed in their native tongue, with Tall Feather occasionally, translating portions for the sisters' benefit. Running Fox had been hunting in higher elevations when he noticed smoke from Eagle's Rock. Familiar with the elders' preference for solitude, he had approached out of concern rather than casual visitation. "He brings important news," Tall Feather eventually told the girls. "Blue Coats have built a new fort near Shadow Falls. Many soldiers now patrol valleys, looking for raiders, but also asking about missing children from wagon trains." Hannah's heart quickened. "They're still looking for us after all this time?" Tall Feather nodded. "Man in Pikes Peak offers many dollars to find Cooper sisters. Your uncle, perhaps." The revelation stunned Hannah. Uncle James, their father's brother who had settled in Pikes Peak years earlier, must have learned of the massacre and was searching for them. The knowledge that someone from their former life actively sought them created a complex swirl of emotions: hope, anxiety, and unexpected reluctance. "Running Fox says the path to Pikes Peak opens when spring comes," Tall Feather continued. "He can guide you there if this is your choice." "And if it isn't?" Hannah asked quietly. The question hung in the air, its implications momentous. Tall Feather's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes held unexpected depth. "Every path has purpose. Choosing belongs to you and your small sister." That night, after Running Fox had departed with promises to return in early spring, Hannah lay awake beside Sarah, contemplating their future. Return to civilization, to beds with real mattresses, to proper schooling, to their sole remaining family. Or remain in this new life they'd built, continuing to learn wisdom that few white Americans would ever encounter. "Hannah," Sarah whispered, apparently sharing her sleeplessness, "do we have to go to Uncle James?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "He's our family." "Tall Feather is family now too," Sarah countered with a child's straightforward logic. "He saved us just like family should." Hannah couldn't argue with this assessment. Over the months, the Cheyenne hunter had become far more than a reluctant rescuer or temporary guardian. He had patiently taught them to survive, had nursed them through illness, had shared his knowledge and home without reservation. "We don't need to decide tonight," Hannah soothed, stroking her sister's hair. "Let's sleep now." The following weeks brought gradual signs of winter's retreat. Icicles dropped steadily from pine branches during daylight hours, and patches of ground began to emerge from beneath melting snow. Tall Feather intensified their education, seemingly aware that their remaining time together might be limited. "Before spring moon is full, you must complete winter learning," he announced one morning. This final phase of instruction focused on integration, combining separate skills into comprehensive survival knowledge. The sisters learned to predict weather changes by observing animal behavior, to navigate by stars when clouds obscured landmarks, to identify safe river crossings during spring melt. Most importantly, Tall Feather emphasized decision-making under pressure, when to seek shelter versus press forward, when to conserve resources versus use them freely, when to trust instincts versus careful analysis. "Survival is not just knowing things," he explained. "Survival is choosing the right thing at the right moment." As March arrived, bringing noticeably longer days and the first returning birdsong, Hannah found herself increasingly torn about their future. Her journal entries reflected this internal conflict. March 8, 1863. Tall Feather taught us to tap maple trees for sap today. The sweet taste reminded me of candy Father once brought home from Philadelphia. I find myself caught between worlds now, remembering our former life while deeply immersed in this new one. Sarah seems certain she wishes to stay, but I wonder, if that's fair to her future, what opportunities would she miss if we remained in the wilderness? Yet what wisdom would we lose by returning to civilization? How can I possibly make this choice for both of us? The climax of their winter education arrived during the first significant thaw. Tall Feather led them to a small frozen pond near Eagle's Rock, now showing signs of weakening ice around its edges. Without preamble, he deliberately stepped onto the thinning ice, creating a spiderweb of cracks. "What do you do?" he asked calmly, as the ice beneath his feet began to give way. "I am falling through. How do you save me without becoming a victim also?" Hannah froze momentarily, panic flaring at this unexpected test. But Sarah moved instantly, grabbing a long fallen branch and extending it toward Tall Feather, while keeping her own body flat on solid ground to distribute her weight. "Good!" Tall Feather nodded, carefully retreating from the dangerous ice. "Now explain why this works, Tall One." Hannah swallowed hard, recognizing that this lesson transcended mere ice rescue. Because sometimes the most dangerous action is rushing in without thinking. Sometimes direct help actually creates two victims instead of saving anyone. The Cheyenne's eyes crinkled slightly, his version of a smile. "You learn well. Different strength, same wisdom." That evening, as they prepared a celebratory meal of fresh rabbit stew, their first non-preserved meat in months, Tall Feather presented each sister with a gift. For Hannah, he had crafted a medicine pouch containing small samples of their most essential healing plants, each wrapped in thin hide with its name written in both English and Cheyenne. "For when memory needs help," he explained. For Sarah, he had created a necklace of carved wood and polished stones, each element representing an animal spirit whose qualities the young girl had demonstrated during their time together. "Fox for cleverness," Tall Feather explained, touching each piece. "Bear for healing power, eagle for seeing far, wolf for loyalty to family." The gifts represented a completion of sorts, acknowledgement that the sisters had absorbed the essential knowledge Tall Feather had to share. Whether they chose to continue this path or return to their former world, they carried within them lessons that had transformed them irrevocably. The first true day of spring arrived with unexpected warmth, melting the remaining snow patches and coaxing dormant life from the forest floor. Hannah woke to find Tall Feather already outside Eagle's Rock, harvesting the tender shoots of early plants. "First medicine's strongest," the Cheyenne explained as Hannah joined him. "Earth's first offering. After sleep holds special power." They worked in companionable silence, filling baskets with fresh growth, dandelion leaves for blood-purifying tea, chickweed for healing salves, wild onion shoots for flavoring and health. The forest hummed with renewing energy as hibernating. Creatures emerged and migratory birds returned to established nesting territories. "Running fox returns tomorrow," Tall Feather said casually as they sorted their gathered plants. "Trails to the valley now clear enough for travel." The statement, though delivered without emphasis, carried monumental implications. The time for decision had arrived. Tonight, Hannah would need to determine their future path, return to civilization and their uncle's care, or remain in the wilderness with the knowledge Tall Feather had imparted. When Sarah awoke and joined them, Tall Feather announced a special excursion. "Today we visited a sacred place, important before choosing a journey." They followed a narrow trail that wound through the awakening forest, climbing steadily toward higher elevations where patches of snow still clung to north-facing slopes. Tall Feather moved with surprising agility despite his age, pausing occasionally to indicate significant plants or animal signs for the girls' continuing education. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, they emerged onto a rocky outcropping that offered a breathtaking panoramic view. From this vantage point, Hannah could see the distant ribbon of Shadow Falls, the winding course of the river below, and squinting against the morning sun, the faint geometric shapes of the new fort Tall Feather had mentioned, nestled in the valley where their wagon train had met its fate. Seeing Place, Tall Feather named it simply, where the past, present, future become visible together. The Cheyenne settled cross-legged on a flat rock, motioning for the sisters to join him. From his pouch, he withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft hide, ceremoniously unwrapping it to reveal a pipe carved from red stone. "Many winters I come here when the path seems unclear," he explained as he packed the pipe with a mixture of dried herbs. Smoke carries questions to ancestors. Sometimes answers come back. Hannah watched with fascination as Tall Feather conducted what was clearly a sacred ritual, lighting the pipe with practiced movements, drawing the smoke and releasing it toward the 4 cardinal directions, while speaking softly in Cheyenne. Though Hannah didn't understand the words, their rhythmic cadence carried undeniable power. After completing the ritual, Tall Feather turned his penetrating gaze on the sisters. "Now you speak your hearts. No fear of wrong words." Sarah, typically quiet during serious discussions, surprised Hannah by speaking first. "I want to stay with you," she said directly to Tall Feather. "I dream about the fort and Uncle James. In dreams, I'm in a dress that's too tight with shoes. That hurt my feet. People look at me like I'm strange because I know plants and can track animals." "And you, Tall One?" Tall Feather prompted, turning to Hannah. Hannah struggled to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. "I feel torn," she admitted. "Part of me knows we should return to our own world, to education, to opportunities, to what our parents would have wanted. But another part feels—" she searched for the right words— "feels like I've discovered something true here that I might lose forever if we go back." Tall Feather nodded, unsurprised by their responses. Sisters walk different spirit paths, though born to same parents. This is natural. He tapped the ground between them. But paths that divide can meet again when walked with wisdom. He refilled his pipe, this time offering it first to Hannah, a gesture of profound respect that recognized her status as decision-maker for the sisters. "I can't." Hannah hesitated, remembering stern warnings from their church minister about heathen practices. "Not asking you to become Cheyenne," Tall Feather clarified, "asking you to open your mind to see clearly. Smoke carries away clouds that hide the true path." After a moment's deliberation, Hannah accepted the pipe, following Tall Feather's instructions to draw the smoke without inhaling deeply. The herbs created a momentary lightheadedness, followed by unusual clarity, as though her thoughts had been scattered puzzle pieces suddenly arranged in comprehensible order. When Sarah took her turn, her small face grew solemn with unexpected maturity. The 3 sat in silence afterward, gazing out over the awakening spring landscape. 3 souls, unified by circumstance, yet divided by heritage and destiny. Finally, Tall Feather broke the silence that had settled over them at seeing. "Place, I have something to show you." He reached inside his buckskin shirt and withdrew a folded paper, yellowed with age and crumpled from long storage. With careful movements, he smoothed it open between them. Hannah gasped. It was a wanted poster, crudely printed but still legible, featuring a younger Tall Feather's face. The text declared him a dangerous renegade, wanted for theft of army property and aiding deserters, with a substantial reward offered for his capture. 10 winters ago, Tall Feather explained, blue-coat soldiers burned Cheyenne village near Fort Laramie, said we stole horses that were already ours by treaty. Many died, women, children, elders. I helped 2 young blue-coats who refused to shoot children escape, led them to safety in the mountains. For this, I became an enemy. The revelation stunned Hannah. This explained Tall Feather's isolation, his wariness of soldiers, and his careful concealment of Eagle's Rock. "You're a fugitive," Hannah whispered. "All this time." Tall Feather nodded. "Cannot go near forts or settlements. Cannot live with my people, as bluecoats would punish the entire band for hiding me." "Then why did you help us?" Sarah asked, wide-eyed. "We could have revealed your location." The old hunter's weathered face softened. "Children are never enemies. Spirits placed you in my path for purpose." This new understanding cast their entire time with Tall Feather in a different light. The Cheyenne had risked his freedom, perhaps his life, to shelter them despite having every reason to distrust anyone associated with the civilization that had branded him a criminal. "What happened to the soldiers you saved?" Hannah asked. "One died of sickness despite my medicine. Others found new life with Crow people to the north, took Crow's wife, and lives still." His eyes held ancient pain. "Price of mercy is sometimes high, never regretted." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the outcropping, Tall Feather gathered his ceremonial items and prepared to return to Eagle's Rock. Before departing their sacred viewpoint, he turned to Hannah with unusual directness. "Tomorrow, running. Fox comes. Tonight you must choose, not just for now, but for a path that honors both sisters' spirits." He touched Hannah's medicine pouch, then Sarah's spirit animal necklace. "My teachings already inside you cannot be taken away, no matter where feet walk." The journey back to Eagle's Rock passed in contemplative silence. Even normally chatty Sarah seemed absorbed in the gravity of their impending decision. Hannah's mind raced with possibilities, responsibilities, and consequences, each option carrying both promise and sacrifice. That evening, Tall Feather prepared a special meal using the spring's first offerings combined with the last of their winter stores, a symbolic bridging of seasons that felt appropriate to their moment of transition. As they ate, the Cheyenne shared stories not of legendary figures or tribal history, but of his own life, his childhood in a large Cheyenne encampment, his calling to the medicine path, his marriage to a woman who died from a fever before they could have children. "Life gives many paths," he concluded. "Some chosen, some forced upon us. Wisdom comes in recognizing differences." After their meal, Tall Feather announced he would spend the night in prayer at a small sacred site nearby, leaving the sisters alone to make their decision without influence. This final gesture of respect, acknowledging their autonomy despite their young age, moved Hannah deeply. Before departing, the Cheyenne placed something wrapped in soft hide on the sleeping furs between the sisters. "For remembering, whatever. Path opens tomorrow." When they unwrapped the package, the sisters discovered two exquisitely crafted miniature dolls, one representing Hannah with her journal, the other depicting Sarah with plants in her hands. They were made from materials gathered throughout their time together: buckskin from deer they had helped process, hair from the tail of a fox they had tracked, tiny beads Tall Feather had kept for special purposes. "They're beautiful," Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Left alone in Eagle's Rock, the sisters sat beside the fire, the dolls cradled carefully in their hands. Outside, darkness settled over the forest as creatures of the night began their chorus of calls and movements. "What should we do, Hannah?" Sarah finally asked, her voice small but steady. Hannah reached for her journal, her faithful companion, throughout their ordeal, and slowly leafed through the pages. Her earliest entries reflected terror and disorientation. The middle sections documented their growing knowledge. The most recent pages revealed emerging wisdom and self-discovery. "I've been thinking about something Father once told me," Hannah said after a long silence. "He said that sometimes when no choice seems perfect, the truest path is finding a new option no one has considered." Sarah's face brightened with interest. "Like what?" Hannah closed her journal and squared her shoulders with newfound resolution. I think I know what we need to do, but it will require courage from both of us and trust that Tall Feather has truly taught us enough. As midnight approached, the sisters finalized their plan, whispering together with growing excitement and determination. By the time Tall Feather returned at dawn, their decision was made. Not a choice between two existing options, but a third path neither the man nor the girls had articulated until now. When Running Fox arrived mid-morning, he found 3 figures. Waiting for him outside Eagle's Rock, the elderly Cheyenne hunter with his characteristic impassive expression, and 2 white girls who bore little resemblance to the frightened, desperate children who had emerged from behind Shadow Falls 10 months earlier. These were not victims awaiting rescue, but young wilderness survivors prepared to shape their own destiny. Running Fox's expression revealed momentary surprise as Hannah stepped forward to address him in halting but determined Cheyenne. "We thank you for coming," she said, carefully pronouncing each word Tall Feather had taught her. "We have decided our path." Switching to English, Hannah explained the plan she and Sarah had crafted during their night of deliberation. It was neither a complete return to white civilization nor a full embrace of wilderness life. Instead, they proposed something unprecedented, a carefully balanced approach that honored both worlds. "We want to meet our uncle," Hannah stated firmly, "but not to live permanently at the fort or be sent east. We wish to build a life here, near enough to learn from Tall Feather while also receiving education from our own people." Running Fox listened without interruption, his stoic face betraying neither approval nor rejection. When Hannah finished speaking, he turned to Tall Feather, addressing him with rapid Cheyenne that Hannah could only partially comprehend. Tall Feather's response, delivered with dignified authority, seemed to carry significant weight. Though Hannah couldn't understand every word, she recognized phrases about spirit-guided choices and bridges between peoples. Finally, Running Fox nodded. "This plan has wisdom," he acknowledged in accented but clear English. "But there are many obstacles. White Man's Fort did not welcome Cheyenne visitors. Your uncle may not accept such an arrangement." "We understand the challenges," Hannah replied, "but we're prepared to try." The adults exchanged looks that contained volumes of unspoken history, generations of conflict, misunderstanding, and occasional cooperation between their peoples. Hannah held her breath, awaiting their verdict. 3 days to prepare," Running Fox finally announced. "Then I will guide you to a place where fort soldiers patrol. You approach alone, safer this way. I watch from a distance to ensure your safety." Relief flooded through Hannah. The first hurdle had been cleared. Tall Feather's expression remained unreadable, but a slight nod conveyed his acceptance of the plan. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Tall Feather helped the sisters organize their accumulated knowledge into practical forms they could carry forward. Hannah's journal was supplemented with additional pages containing crucial information, detailed maps of seasonal plant locations, comprehensive lists of medicinal preparations, and step-by-step instructions for wilderness skills they had mastered. "Words remain when memory fades," Tall Feather explained as he guided Hannah's documentation efforts. "What we write becomes teaching for others when time comes." Sarah, meanwhile, assembled a collection of essential seeds and plant specimens, carefully pressing and labeling each one as Hannah had taught her. Though only 9 years old, her understanding of local flora now surpassed that of most adult settlers in the territory. On their final evening at Eagle's Rock, Tall Feather performed a ceremony unlike any the sisters had witnessed before. He burned sacred herbs in the central fire, creating aromatic smoke that filled the dwelling while chanting in a ceremonial dialect even Running Fox seemed to struggle to follow. "Not just the Cheyenne ceremony," he explained to the wide-eyed girls. "Very old medicine from before tribes divided. for protection on journeys between worlds. Using a mixture of red ochre, bear fat, and pulverized herbs, he painted symbols on the sisters' foreheads, different patterns for each girl. For Hannah, interconnected circles representing wisdom and leadership. For Sarah, flowing lines suggest healing and growth. "These wash away," Tall Feather told them. "But meaning stays in spirit, reminds others with medicine eyes that you walk with protection." Running Fox, observing from near the entrance, appeared impressed by the rare ritual. "Few receive such blessings," he commented quietly to Hannah. "Tall Feather sees great purpose in your path." Hannah felt the weight of that expectation settle on her shoulders. They weren't simply choosing a practical compromise. They were attempting something profound, perhaps even historic, creating a genuine bridge between worlds that had long existed in conflict. The following dawn brought their departure from Eagle's Rock. Tall Feather had prepared travel packs containing essential supplies, dried meat and berries, medicine bundles, spare moccasins he had crafted to replace their long-deteriorated shoes, and small tools suitable for wilderness survival. Farewells proved more difficult than Hannah had anticipated. After nearly a year in Tall Feather's care, the elderly Cheyenne had become far more than a temporary guardian. Though never demonstrative with physical affection, he had shown his devotion through countless acts of teaching, protection, and guidance. When the moment of parting arrived, Tall Feather surprised both girls by embracing them, a gesture so unexpected that Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. "My lodge remains your lodge," the Cheyenne said simply. "Return when spirit calls." With Running Fox leading the way, the sisters began their journey towards civilization. The route avoided main trails, following instead animal paths and natural features that offered concealment from potential patrols. Though the new fort was less than a day's normal travel from Eagle's Rock, Running Fox's careful approach extended their journey to nearly 2 days. As they walked, Hannah observed their surroundings with newly educated eyes. Where once she had seen merely woods or hills, she now recognized specific ecosystems, understood which plants indicated water sources nearby, and could predict game movements based on subtle environmental cues. These skills, non-existent when they had first fled behind Shadow Falls, had become second nature. Sarah demonstrated a similar transformation. The timid, dependent child who had clutched Hannah's hand in terror now moved confidently through the wilderness, often noticing details even Running Fox overlooked. Once she casually pointed out bearberry plants hidden beneath forest debris. A valuable medicinal herb Running Fox admitted he hadn't spotted. "Small one has a gift," he remarked to Hannah, "rare even among my people." On the afternoon of their second travel day, Running Fox led them to a ridgeline overlooking the valley. Below, the newly established Fort Clearwater stood as a stark, geometric intrusion on the natural landscape. Square wooden buildings, arranged around a central parade ground, the American flag fluttering above the tallest structure. "Cavalry patrol comes this way near sunset," Running Fox informed them, pointing toward a well-worn trail leading from the fort. "Best place for you to be found." He studied their appearance critically. Must look like lost children, not wilderness dwellers. Hannah understood his meaning. Despite their white heritage, 10 months with Tall Feather had transformed them both physically and behaviorally. Their movements had acquired the silent, efficient quality of indigenous woodland travelers. Their handmade clothing, though recognizably adapted from their original garments, incorporated Cheyenne design elements and materials. Following Running Fox's guidance, the sisters made subtle adjustments to appear more as desperate survivors than acculturated wilderness children. They loosened their neatly braided hair, smudged their faces with strategic dirt, and arranged their clothing to conceal the more obvious Cheyenne elements. "We cannot hide all knowledge in your eyes," Running Fox observed, "but soldiers see what they expect to see." As sunset approached, he led them to a position near the patrol route, concealed within a stand of young aspens. "Wait here," he instructed. "When bluecoats appear, walk onto trails as if wandering lost. I watch from the trees until you reach the fort safely." "What if they don't believe us?" Sarah asked, sudden anxiety clouding her face. Fox's stoic expression softened slightly. "Tell the truth, but simple version. Lost children found by a kind tribal grandfather who kept you safe. No need for names or places." With that advice, he melted into the forest with such fluid movement that even Hannah, accustomed to Tall Feather's silent departures, couldn't track his passage. The sisters settled into their hiding place, Hannah's arm protectively around Sarah's shoulders as they awaited the patrol. "Are you afraid?" Hannah whispered. Sarah considered the question with unchildlike thoughtfulness. "Not of soldiers," she finally answered. "Afraid of tight shoes and scratchy dresses and people who think plants are just weeds." Hannah squeezed her sister gently. "Remember our plan. We're not giving up what we've learned. We're adding to it." The distant sound of hoofbeats alerted them to the approaching patrol. Hannah's heart raced as she recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, 6 riders moving at an unhurried pace along the forest trail. This was the moment that would determine whether their plan succeeded or failed. "Ready?" she whispered to Sarah, who nodded resolutely. Hand in hand, the Cooper sisters emerged from their hiding place, deliberately stumbling onto the trail approximately 50 yards ahead of the patrol. Hannah had carefully choreographed their appearance, not directly in front of the soldiers, which might appear suspiciously convenient, but far enough ahead to seem natural, yet close enough to be noticed. The patrol leader spotted them immediately, raising his hand to halt his men. "Good Lord," they heard him exclaim. "There's children out here." Hannah felt Sarah's hand tighten in hers as the soldiers urged their mounts forward. This was no longer a theoretical plan, but a dangerous reality. They were willingly placing themselves in the hands of the same civilization whose failures had left them for dead nearly a year earlier. The patrol leader, a weathered sergeant with a thick mustache, reined his horse to a stop before them. "Where did you come from?" he demanded, his gruff voice softened by evident concern. "Are you alone out here?" Hannah had rehearsed this moment extensively, crafting a response that contained enough truth to be convincing while protecting Tall Feather's location and identity. "My name is Hannah Cooper," she said, allowing her voice to quaver slightly. "This is my sister, Sarah. We survived the Vulture Canyon massacre last summer. An elderly Cheyenne grandfather found us and kept us safe through winter." The sergeant's expression transformed from concern to astonishment. "Cooper," he repeated incredulously. "James Cooper's been tearing up 3 territories looking for his nieces since last July." The confirmation that their uncle still searched for them sent a wave of relief through Hannah. Despite 10 months without a word, they hadn't been forgotten or abandoned. A flicker of guilt accompanied this relief. Perhaps their third path plan was merely selfish desire rather than wisdom. "Mount up with my men," the sergeant ordered, his manner now brisk with purpose. "Your uncle's going to think he's seen ghosts." As the soldiers helped them onto horseback, Hannah caught a glimpse of movement in the forest. Running Fox, fulfilling his promise to ensure their safety. She offered a nearly imperceptible nod in his direction before turning her attention to the fort below. The third path had been initiated. Now came the truly challenging part, convincing Uncle James, the U.S. Army, and the rigid structures of American society to accept an arrangement unprecedented in frontier history. 2 white children choosing to live between worlds, maintaining connection to indigenous wisdom while participating in their own culture's education and opportunities. Fort Clearwater grew larger as they descended the trail, its wooden walls representing both homecoming and potential confinement. Hannah felt Sarah's questioning gaze upon her and summoned a reassuring smile. Whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer helpless victims, but determined young survivors with a unique vision for their future. The gates of Fort Clearwater swung open as the patrol approached. Word of their discovery had apparently raced ahead, as a small crowd had already gathered in the central yard. Soldiers, civilian staff, and a tall, bearded man who pushed forward with desperate urgency as they entered. "Hannah! Sarah!" His voice. It broke with emotion. "My God, it's really you!" James Cooper rushed toward them as they dismounted, dropping to his knees to embrace both girls simultaneously. His body shook with silent sobs as he clutched them tightly, as though fearing they might vanish if he loosened his grip. Hannah studied her uncle's face, familiar yet changed from her childhood memories. The 4 years since they'd last seen him had etched new lines around his eyes, and his once dark hair now showed significant grey. Whether this aging was natural or accelerated by months of desperate searching, she couldn't tell. "We thought," he whispered hoarsely, finally pulling back to examine them properly. "Everyone said no one could have survived before Hannah could." "Respond." The fort commander approached, a stern-faced major whose perfect posture and immaculate uniform exuded authority. "Inside, please," he directed, gesturing toward the largest building. "This reunion deserves privacy, and the doctor should examine the children immediately." The following hours passed in a blur of examinations, questions, and explanations. The fort physician, a kindly man named Dr. Wilson, checked them thoroughly for injuries or illness, expressing astonishment at their robust health despite their ordeal. "Remarkable," he muttered as he listened to Sarah's strong heartbeat. "Most children lost in the wilderness for even a few weeks show significant malnutrition and exposure damage. You two appear healthier than many of our soldiers." Hannah provided a carefully edited version of their survival story to the commander and other officials who gathered in his office. She explained their escape during the ambush, their discovery of shelter in the mountain cave, and their rescue by an elderly Cheyenne man who had taught them survival skills and cared for them through winter. He was alone, separated from his tribe, Hannah acknowledged when directly questioned. "He lived in the mountains by himself. He treated us like his own grandchildren." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. "And he simply released you near our patrol route?" the major asked dubiously. "He knew we had family searching for us," Hannah replied truthfully. "When trails cleared enough for safe travel, he helped us find our way toward the fort." Throughout the questioning, Uncle James remained beside them, occasionally squeezing their hands supportively. He seemed to grow increasingly agitated as the interrogation continued, finally interrupting with uncharacteristic briskness. "Enough," he declared. "These children have survived a nightmare beyond comprehension. They need rest and peace, not an inquisition." The major frowned but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Cooper. We'll continue tomorrow when they're rested. We still need precise information about this Cheyenne man's location." A warning bell sounded in Hannah's mind. "Why?" she asked, unable to mask her sudden concern. "Standard procedure," the major answered smoothly. "Any civilian who provides aid to American citizens must be properly acknowledged and compensated." Hannah didn't believe him for a moment. Tall Feather's wanted poster flashed in her memory, faded but still valid in military records. Any revelation of the Cheyenne's location would endanger his freedom, perhaps his life. "I'm afraid we were quite disoriented during our journey," Hannah said carefully. "We couldn't possibly identify the location on a map." Sarah, who had remained silent throughout most of the questioning, suddenly spoke up. "He saved us," she stated, with childlike directness. "The soldiers didn't find us, but he did." An uncomfortable silence followed this simple but pointed observation. The major cleared his throat and gestured toward the door. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. Quarters have been prepared for you in the civilian housing section." Their temporary accommodation proved surprisingly comfortable, a small but clean room attached to the quartermaster's residence, with real beds featuring mattresses and blankets. After nearly a year of sleeping on fur pallets, the sisters found the supposed luxuries strangely uncomfortable. "Too soft," Sarah whispered, as they lay side by side, unable to sleep despite their exhaustion. "And it smells wrong," Hannah agreed. The room's sense of soap, starched fabric and wood polish seemed oppressively artificial after the natural aromas of Eagle's Rock, smoke, herbs, leather, and pine. "We'll adjust," she promised, though uncertainty clouded her own thoughts. Their carefully constructed plan had overlooked these immediate challenges: the intense scrutiny of military authorities, the pressure to reveal Tall Feather's location, and the stark sensory differences between their wilderness life and fort existence. Morning brought new complications. The quartermaster's wife, a well-meaning woman named Mrs. Harris, arrived with donated clothing and abundant expectations about proper behavior for rescued young ladies. "These dresses should fit well enough until proper measurements can be taken," she announced, laying out 2 gingham garments that represented everything the sisters had left behind. "And I've brought soap and proper brushes for your hair. Such a shame it was cut so roughly, but it will grow back in time." Hannah accepted the clothing with polite thanks, while Sarah regarded the dresses with undisguised dismay. The material felt stiff and confining after their adapted buckskin garments, and the tight collars seemed designed specifically for discomfort. "After you're dressed, your uncle wishes to speak with you," Mrs. Harris continued. "He's making arrangements to transport you to Pikes Peak as soon as possible." This announcement accelerated Hannah's timeline. They needed to present their alternative plan to Uncle James before such arrangements became finalized. Once they left Fort Clearwater, their leverage would diminish considerably. When Mrs. Harris departed, Hannah helped Sarah don the uncomfortable new clothing. "Remember," she whispered as she buttoned her sister's dress, "we agreed to compromise on some things to gain freedom in others. These dresses are temporary." Uncle James awaited them in a small meeting room adjacent to the commander's office. His face brightened as they entered, though Hannah noticed a flicker of something, perhaps disappointment, cross his features when he registered their transformed appearance. The new clothing couldn't disguise how thoroughly their time in the wilderness had changed them. Their skin remained sun-darkened, their mannerisms reflected Cheyenne influence, and their eyes carried wisdom far beyond their years. "My dear girls," he greeted them warmly nonetheless, "I've arranged everything. We leave for Pikes Peak tomorrow morning with a military escort. From there we can decide whether to remain or return east to your mother's family in Pennsylvania." Hannah took a deep breath, exchanging a confirming glance with Sarah before responding. "Uncle James, we are grateful beyond words for your search efforts and your love, but we need to discuss our future plans with you." His expression shifted to puzzlement. "Plans? But surely you're eager to return to normal life after such hardship." "Our understanding of normal has changed," Hannah explained carefully. "The months with our Cheyenne guardian taught us invaluable knowledge that we don't wish to abandon." She outlined their proposed compromise: living with their uncle in Pikes Peak, receiving proper education and participating in community life while maintaining connection to the wilderness skills and indigenous wisdom they had acquired. This would include regular returns to the forest for continued learning and practice of their new abilities. Uncle James's face registered increasing confusion as Hannah spoke. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "Hannah, I understand. This man helped you survive, and gratitude is appropriate, but you're white children from a respectable Pennsylvania family. Your future lies within your own society, not straddling some imaginary boundary between civilization and savagery." "It's not savagery," Sarah interjected with unexpected firmness. Tall... She caught herself before revealing the name. Our Cheyenne grandfather knows more about healing plants than Dr. Wilson does. He can read weather better than the Fort Scouts. He taught us to live when everyone else thought we were dead. James's expression softened at Sarah's passionate defense, but his position remained unchanged. Sarah, dear, you're far too young to make such determinations about your future. And Hannah, while I respect your maturity, you cannot fully understand the social implications of what you're suggesting. Young ladies who associate openly with Indians become outcasts in decent society. We're already different, Hannah countered. 10 months in the wilderness has changed us in ways that can't be undone by simply resuming our former lives. Uncle James sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. Girls, I've spent every waking moment since learning of the massacre searching for you. I've exhausted my savings, neglected my business, and lived with grief I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Now that I've miraculously found you alive, I cannot in good conscience allow you to pursue a path that would lead to your ostracism or unhappiness. Hannah recognized the love behind his resistance, but frustration mounted nevertheless. They had survived impossible odds, had developed extraordinary skills and wisdom, only to be dismissed as children incapable of determining their own best interests. We're not asking permission, she said finally, drawing on the courage Tall Feather had cultivated. We're proposing partnership. You provide what we need from the white world: home, formal education, community. We maintain what we need from our wilderness experience: knowledge, connection to nature, the skills that kept us alive when everyone else had given up. James studied her with new awareness, seemingly recognizing for the first time that the niece before him was not the child he remembered from Pennsylvania. Something in her steady gaze and resolute posture reflected a maturity beyond her years, authority earned through survival rather than granted by adults. The mayor wants our Cheyenne Guardian's location, Hannah continued, pressing her advantage. He claims it's to reward him, but if we're forced to choose between worlds entirely, we'll protect him by disappearing again. It was partly bluff, partly desperate truth. Hannah knew they could potentially locate Eagle's Rock again, but returning to full wilderness, living without Tall Feather's guidance, would be dangerous. Still, the threat clearly impacted James, whose face paled at the possibility of losing his newly recovered nieces. You would run away? He asked quietly. If necessary, Hannah confirmed, trying to project more confidence than she felt. But we don't want that. We want to build a life that honors both paths. The one our parents set us on, and the one that saved us when that first path violently ended. James fell silent, visibly struggling with this unexpected challenge to his authority and assumptions. After what seemed an eternity, he cleared his throat. I need time to consider this unusual proposal, he said finally. In the meantime, I'll inform the Major that your benefactor's location remains unknown to you, that he blindfolded you before leading you near the patrol route. Relief flooded through Hannah. It wasn't acceptance, but it was an opening, protection for Tall Feather while their negotiation continued. As their uncle escorted them back to their quarters, Hannah noticed Sarah touching the place beneath her, a collar where Tall Feather's spirit animal necklace remained hidden. The fort's rigid customs had required its concealment, but its presence against Sarah's skin seemed to provide silent strength. The sisters exchanged knowing glances as they walked. Their third path wouldn't be easily established, but they had survived far worse challenges than adult skepticism. The wilderness had taught them patience, perseverance, and the quiet power of waiting for the right moment. Like the plants, Tall Feather had shown them that grew in seemingly impossible conditions, between rocks, through snow, against powerful winds. They would find ways to thrive in the narrow spaces between conflicting worlds. The following morning brought a surprise development. Hannah and Sarah were summoned to the infirmary, where they found Dr. Wilson engaged in animated conversation with a distinguished-looking gentleman in civilian clothes. "Ah, here they are," Dr. Wilson exclaimed as they entered. "Hannah and Sarah. Cooper, allow me to introduce Professor Lawrence Mitchell from the Smithsonian Institution. He's been documenting indigenous medical practices throughout the territories." The professor, a tall, lean man with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, regarded the sisters with unconcealed interest. "Dr. Wilson has shared parts of your remarkable story," he said, extending his hand first to Hannah, then to Sarah. "I would be honored to learn more about your experiences with Cheyenne medicine." Hannah exchanged a cautious glance with Sarah. The professor's interest seemed genuine, but after yesterday's interrogation, they had grown wary of questions about Tallfeather. "What exactly are you documenting, Professor?" Hannah asked politely. "But directly. The rapidly disappearing knowledge of native healing practices," Mitchell explained, his enthusiasm evident. "Western medicine has much to learn from indigenous traditions that have developed over thousands of years. My work aims to preserve this wisdom before it's lost forever." He gestured toward an open journal on Dr. Wilson's desk, filled with detailed botanical drawings and extensive notes. "I've spent 3 years traveling throughout the territories, but have found few willing to share authentic knowledge. Most tribal practitioners understandably distrust white researchers." Hannah felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone from their own society who valued precisely what they wished to preserve, a potential ally in their quest to maintain connection with Tallfeather's teachings. "We learned a great deal about medicinal plants," she acknowledged. "Carefully. Our guardian was exceptionally knowledgeable." Professor Mitchell's eyes brightened. "Would you be willing to share some of that knowledge, with appropriate credit given to the Cheyenne tradition, of course?" Before Hannah could respond, Dr. Wilson interjected. "I've examined these children thoroughly, Professor. They display remarkable health after 10 months in wilderness conditions. Whatever treatment they received was extraordinarily effective." Hannah made a swift decision. Reaching into the pocket of her dress, she withdrew a small packet wrapped in buckskin, a basic headache remedy Tallfeather had permitted her to bring. "This contains willow bark, feverfew, and 2 other ingredients," she explained, unwrapping it carefully. "It relieves pain without the drowsiness caused by laudanum." The professor accepted the mixture with reverence, examining it closely before taking a cautious sniff. "Fascinating. I detect certain elements I've encountered before, but the combination is unique." He looked up with newfound respect. "And you understand its preparation and application." "We understand hundreds of remedies," Sarah stated simply. "Our grandfather taught us which plants heal burns, stop bleeding, fight infection, reduce swelling, ease breathing." Hannah watched Professor Mitchell's expression transform from academic interest to profound admiration as Sarah continued listing medicinal applications. The normally reserved 9-year-old spoke with surprising authority, using proper botanical terminology alongside Cheyenne names for various plants. "Extraordinary," Mitchell murmured when Sarah finally paused. "Absolutely extraordinary. The knowledge you possess could advance medical understanding significantly." He turned to Hannah with sudden intensity. "Your uncle mentioned you've been journaling. May I see your notes?" Hannah hesitated. Her journal contained not only medicinal information, but personal reflections, detailed descriptions of Tallfeather's teachings, and potentially identifying details about Eagle's Rock's location. "Portions of it," she agreed conditionally. "Some entries are private." When she retrieved the journal from their quarters and showed Mitchell selected pages of botanical drawings and preparation instructions, His excitement became almost palpable. "This is more comprehensive than anything I've documented in 3 years of research," he declared, carefully examining her detailed illustrations. "The precision of your observations is remarkable for someone your age." Hannah recognized an opportunity. "Professor Mitchell, my sister and I face a dilemma. We value this knowledge and wish to continue learning, but our uncle expects us to return entirely to our former way of life. A significant loss to science if this learning ends prematurely," he observed. Their conversation was interrupted by Uncle James's arrival. His face registered surprise at finding his nieces engaged in serious discussion with the distinguished "Professor, Mr. Cooper," Mitchell greeted him warmly. "I've been examining your niece's extraordinary ethnobotanical knowledge. They possess an understanding of indigenous medicine that scholars would require decades to acquire." James nodded uncomfortably. "Yes, they've mentioned their lessons. We're grateful for anything that helped them survive." "Oh, this goes far beyond survival skills," Mitchell countered enthusiastically. "Their documentation of Cheyenne pharmacology represents a significant scientific contribution. The Smithsonian would be extremely interested in supporting continued studies." Hannah watched her uncle's expression shift from polite disinterest to cautious reconsideration. Mitchell's academic credentials and institutional affiliation lent legitimacy to knowledge James had previously dismissed as primitive folklore. "What exactly are you suggesting, Professor?" James asked. "A collaborative research arrangement," Mitchell replied without hesitation. "The girls would continue documenting their knowledge while receiving proper education. Periodic field excursions would allow them to refresh and expand their understanding of regional flora. The Smithsonian could provide stipends and eventual publication opportunities." The proposal aligned almost perfectly with Hannah and Sarah's third path vision, now reframed in terms of scientific contribution rather than cultural straddling. Hannah held her breath as her uncle considered this unexpected development. "Such an arrangement would be highly irregular," James said slowly, "particularly for girls their age. Irregular circumstances produce irregular opportunities," Mitchell countered. "These children have survived an experience that would have defeated most adults, emerging with knowledge that might otherwise take generations to compile." He gestured toward Hannah's journal. "This work deserves continuation." Dr. Wilson, who had been listening intently, added his professional endorsement. "From a medical perspective, I find their knowledge fascinating. Several preparations they've described could have immediate applications in frontier medicine." Hannah felt the momentum shifting in their favor. The adults were beginning to view their wilderness education not as a primitive deviation to be corrected, but as valuable intellectual achievement to be cultivated. Uncle James turned to Hannah with new consideration in his eyes. "Is this arrangement, continuing your documentation while living in Pikes Peak, what you truly want?" "It's part of what we want," Hannah answered honestly. "We wish to honor what our Cheyenne grandfather taught us, to continue learning from both worlds. The professor's proposal offers a pathway, but we would need freedom to return to the wilderness periodically. Under appropriate supervision, of course," Mitchell added hastily, sensing James's hesitation. A series of rapid footsteps interrupted their discussion as Major Harrison appeared in the doorway, his expression tense. "Mr. Cooper, a moment, please." James excused himself, following the commander into the hallway. Though they spoke in hushed tones, Hannah caught fragments that chilled her blood. "Suspicious activity," Cheyenne observed, "possible connection to the girls." When her uncle returned, his face had paled significantly. "The patrol reports signs of Cheyenne movement near where you were found," he informed them tersely. "The Major believes your benefactor may be watching the fort." Hannah maintained a neutral expression despite her internal alarm. Running Fox had promised to ensure their safety. He must be monitoring developments from concealed positions near the fort. Major Harrison is organizing a search party, James continued. He's convinced this presents an opportunity to locate the man who sheltered you. To thank him, of course, Dr. Wilson interjected optimistically. James's grim expression suggested otherwise. The girls will remain inside the fort until the situation is resolved. Professor Mitchell, observing the tension with scholarly detachment, cleared his throat. Perhaps I might offer an alternative, Major? He called toward the doorway where Harrison lingered. I'm departing for Pikes Peak tomorrow to continue my research. Mr. Cooper and his nieces could accompany me, removing them from this sensitive situation while allowing the military to conduct its operations unencumbered by civilian concerns. The Major considered this suggestion with evident relief. Civilian complications clearly hampered his planned pursuit of the observed Cheyenne. That would be optimal, he agreed. We can provide an escort as far as Redstone Pass. The road beyond to Pikes Peak has been secure for months. Hannah could hardly believe this sudden resolution. Mitchell's proposal had not only advanced their third path vision, but now offered escape from Fort Clearwater before the military could organize an effective search for Tall Feather or Running Fox. Uncle James, torn between concern for his niece's safety and relief at removing them from military interrogation, nodded agreement. We'll prepare for departure immediately. As the adults finalized arrangements, Professor Mitchell turned to Hannah with a knowing look that suggested deeper understanding than he had verbalized. Sometimes science requires diplomatic flexibility, he murmured, particularly when preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost to misunderstanding. In that moment, Hannah realized they had found not merely an academic ally, but a moral one, someone who recognized the value of building bridges between worlds rather than enforcing their separation. Within hours, their departure was arranged. The sisters gathered their few possessions, including Hannah's precious journal and the hidden gifts from Tall Feather. As they prepared to leave Fort Clearwater, Hannah gazed toward the distant ridgeline, where Running Fox likely maintained his protective watch. "We're leading them away from him," she whispered to Sarah as they climbed into Professor Mitchell's wagon. "Tall Feather will be safe." Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. He always said the right path opens when spirits recognize true intention. With military escorts flanking their small wagon, the unusual party departed Fort Clearwater, bound for Pikes Peak. Behind them they left confused officers and their futile search plans. Ahead lay the uncertainty of their new life, one foot in civilization, one in wilderness, and their hearts spanning the divide. 5 years later, Hannah Cooper stood at the edge of a small medicinal garden behind her uncle's expanded home in Pikes Peak. At 17, she had grown into a striking young woman whose presence commanded natural respect despite her age. Her golden brown hair, now long again, was braided with small turquoise beads in a style that blended frontier practicality with subtle Cheyenne influence. The garden represented the physical manifestation of the third path she and Sarah had fought to establish. Neat rows of traditional European herbs alongside carefully tended native medicinal plants, some transplanted from wilderness locations, others grown from seeds Tall Feather had provided during their secret reunions. The yarrows ready for harvest, called 14-year-old Sarah from across the garden. Her sister had blossomed into a confident young healer whose reputation extended throughout the settlement and surrounding homesteads. Local mothers brought their children to the herb girl for remedies before consulting the town's often absent doctor. Hannah smiled at the harmonious scene before her, this carefully tended garden sitting within view of Pikes Peak's church steeple and schoolhouse, epitomizing the balance they had achieved against considerable odds. The journey hadn't been easy. Their arrival in Pikes Peak 5 years earlier had initially sparked curiosity that bordered on spectacle. The miracle girls who had survived the wilderness became objects of fascination, their every movement and mannerism scrutinized for signs of savage influence. Uncle James had weathered considerable criticism for allowing the unorthodox arrangement Professor Mitchell had proposed. Community leaders questioned the propriety of young ladies maintaining connections to indigenous practices, while frontier prejudices generated whispered concerns about their corrupted upbringing during their missing months. Yet the sisters had persevered with quiet dignity. They attended school regularly, excelling in traditional subjects while continuing their specialized education through Professor Mitchell's guidance. Their formal journals documenting Cheyenne pharmacology had been published by the Smithsonian the previous year, bringing academic recognition that gradually silenced local criticism. Most importantly, they had maintained their promise to Tallfeather. 4 times yearly, coinciding with seasonal transitions, they ventured into the wilderness for research expeditions, officially sponsored by Professor Mitchell's ongoing studies. These carefully documented trips provided legitimate cover for their reunions with the Cheyenne hunter who had saved their lives and transformed their understanding of the world. "Hannah, Professor Mitchell's letter has arrived," Uncle James's voice called from the house. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and hurried inside. Her uncle, now fully supportive of their unique path, handed her an official envelope bearing the Smithsonian seal. James Cooper had undergone his own transformation during these 5 years. His initial resistance had gradually yielded to pride, as his niece's knowledge gained recognition beyond the territorial boundaries. The letter contained exciting news. The Smithsonian was funding an expanded study of indigenous medicinal practices throughout the Western Territories, with Hannah and Sarah invited to serve as special contributors despite their youth. Professor Mitchell specifically requested their participation in a comprehensive documentation project that would preserve threatened knowledge for future generations. "This is the opportunity we've been working toward," Hannah told her sister when Sarah joined them. "A chance to create a permanent record of Tallfeather's wisdom while building respectful bridges between different healing traditions." Uncle James nodded approvingly. "He would be proud of how you've honored his teachings." His casual reference to Tallfeather reflected how thoroughly the Cheyenne had been incorporated into their family narrative, no longer a nameless Indian benefactor, but a respected teacher whose influence they acknowledged openly, even if certain details remained protected from authorities who might still wish him harm. That evening, as Pike's Peak settled into twilight routines, an unexpected visitor appeared at their back door. Running Fox, now a trusted messenger between worlds, had arrived unannounced, a rare occurrence that signaled important news. "Tallfeather wishes to see both sisters," he informed them quietly. "Not at the next changing time. Now. Our graduates aren't just practitioners," Sarah explained during a Smithsonian lecture in 1878. "They're translators who can speak the languages of different healing traditions, identifying where these approaches complement each other and where they diverge. This educational model, initially viewed as eccentric at best and dangerous at worst, eventually produced a network of practitioners who transformed frontier medicine. Cooper-trained healers established practices throughout the expanding American West, often in communities where conventional doctors were scarce or unaffordable. Their ability to integrate effective elements from multiple traditions made them particularly valuable in remote settlements, where resources were limited and pragmatic results mattered more than rigid adherence to single systems. The expansion of the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1870s unexpectedly accelerated the Cooper Institute's influence. As travel between East and West became more accessible, academics, physicians, and healing practitioners from across America and Europe began making pilgrimages to the unusual establishment in Colorado. Some came as skeptics determined to expose charlatanism. Most departed as advocates impressed by the sisters' rigorous documentation methods and clinical results. Tall Feather lived to witness the seed he had planted bear remarkable fruit. Though advancing age gradually limited his physical movements, his mind remained sharp and his spiritual authority undiminished. He spent his final years as an honored teacher at the Cooper Institute, where carefully selected students received training in traditional medicine ways. The Cheyenne hunter's presence at the Institute created occasional diplomatic complications. Though the warrant for his arrest had technically expired, military authorities periodically expressed interest in his activities. Hannah and Sarah navigated these challenges with increasing political sophistication, leveraging their connections with the Smithsonian, sympathetic territorial officials, and prominent Eastern intellectuals to ensure Tall Feather's protection. These protective efforts extended beyond their personal teacher to encompass broader indigenous rights. As the U.S. government intensified efforts to confine tribes to reservations in the 1870s and 1880s, the Cooper sisters became increasingly vocal advocates for policies that would preserve traditional lifeways and knowledge systems. Their academic papers and public lectures subtly but persistently challenged prevailing assumptions about indigenous inferiority, using their medical documentation to demonstrate the sophisticated understanding embedded in traditions European Americans had dismissed as primitive. When he finally walked the spirit path in the winter of 1885, Tall Feather's funeral demonstrated the extraordinary community the sisters had helped create. Cheyenne elders conducted traditional ceremonies side by side with a Christian minister, while territorial officials stood respectfully alongside indigenous leaders who had traveled from distant reservations. His body was returned to the earth in the ancient way, but his knowledge lived on, in hundreds of students, thousands of patients, and countless written records. On the first anniversary of Tall Feather's passing, Hannah and Sarah made a pilgrimage to Eagle's Rock, now preserved as a sacred site through complicated legal maneuvers involving the Smithsonian, sympathetic government officials, and private donations. They found the simple dwelling exactly as their teacher had left it, the fire circle cold but ready, the medicinal herbs hanging from the ceiling, the teaching stones arranged in patterns meaningful only to those who had received proper instruction. "It feels like he might return at any moment," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the familiar mortar and pestle where she had ground her first medicines. Hannah nodded, emotion tightening her throat. They had known this day would come when they first accepted Tall Feather's pipe, but the reality of continuing without his physical presence struck harder than anticipated. As they arranged their ceremonial items, unexpected visitors arrived. 2 young Cheyenne women, accompanied by Running Fox, now a respected elder himself. The women introduced themselves as distant relatives of Tall Feather, who had been sent by their band to receive instruction from the Cooper sisters. "Our people said, 'We must learn from the Bridgewalkers,'" the elder of the two explained. "We bring seeds from plants that no longer grow in white man's territories. You teach us your medicine ways, we teach you ours. Together, we keep knowledge alive." Hannah met Sarah's eyes, reading identical recognition in her sister's gaze. Their life's pattern was completing a circle. From desperate children saved by indigenous wisdom, they had become guardians of that wisdom, who now welcomed a new generation of keepers. The bridge they had built between worlds was becoming self-sustaining, capable of spanning even greater divides. That night, as they conducted the memorial ceremony for Tall Feather, a great horned owl called 3 times from the darkness. The same messenger whose voice had marked their first night at Eagle's Rock, nearly 20 years earlier. Sarah smiled through her tears. "He's watching," she said simply. "He always was, Hannah agreed. The Cooper sisters' influence continued to expand in the decades that followed, extending far beyond medicine into environmental conservation, cultural preservation, and education reform. Their detailed documentation of plant habitats and traditional ecological knowledge became invaluable resources for the emerging conservation movement of the late 19th century. When John Muir visited the Cooper Institute in 1889, he spent weeks studying their ethnobotanical archives. "You've captured not just medical knowledge," he wrote afterward, "but an entire relationship with the natural world that we're in danger of losing forever. This work must be protected at all costs." The connection between cultural preservation and environmental conservation became increasingly central to the sisters' work as they witnessed the accelerating transformation of the American West. Their publications began emphasizing how indigenous land management practices had maintained ecological balance for generations before European settlement, a perspective that challenged dominant narratives about untamed wilderness needing to be conquered and exploited. This ecological dimension of their work proved particularly significant during the devastating droughts that struck the Great Plains. In the 1890s, farming communities that had adopted recommended water conservation and crop diversity practices from the Cooper Institute's agricultural publications weathered these challenges more successfully than those committed to monoculture and intensive irrigation. "What we're seeing isn't just crop failure," Hannah testified before a congressional committee investigating the drought's impact. "It's the failure of an approach to land that treats it as a resource to be exploited rather than a relationship to be nurtured. The indigenous knowledge we've documented offers proven alternatives that respect the delicate balance of these prairie ecosystems." Hannah's marriage to David Thornton produced 3 children who continued expanding their parents' vision in different directions. Their eldest daughter, Margaret, became a physician who specializes in women's health, integrating traditional midwifery practices with emerging medical understanding. Their son, Thomas, pursued a legal career focused on indigenous rights and land preservation. Their youngest daughter, Elizabeth, developed the educational aspects of the Cooper Institute's mission, eventually establishing similar training centers in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Sarah never married, devoting herself entirely to research, healing, and mentoring successive generations of students. Her particular focus on pediatric medicine earned her national recognition after she developed treatments for diphtheria and scarlet fever that dramatically reduced child mortality rates compared to conventional approaches of the era. Children's bodies respond differently to medicine than adults, she explained in an 1895 medical journal. Traditional healers have always recognized this, adjusting doses and preparations for different developmental stages. Modern medicine would benefit from similar attentiveness. When Hannah passed away in 1926, at the age of 76, her memorial service at the Cooper Institute drew hundreds of mourners from across the nation, academics, healers, tribal representatives, and ordinary patients whose lives had been saved by the medicine she practiced. The New York Times obituary described her as a singular American visionary who heard wisdom in voices others refused to acknowledge. Sarah, who lived until 1932, spent her final years ensuring their collected knowledge would survive in forms accessible to future generations. Beyond the formal scientific publications, she created simplified healing manuals for frontier families, recorded traditional stories that contained encoded medical wisdom, and established scholarship funds for indigenous students seeking medical education. On her deathbed, surrounded by generations of students who had become an extended family, Sarah Cooper reflected on the extraordinary journey that began with tragedy in Vulture Canyon. "We didn't just survive," she told her gathered successors. her voice frail but her mind still sharp. We learned to thrive by refusing false choices. Remember this when the world demands you choose sides. Sometimes the truest path runs down the middle, honoring wisdom from every direction. After her passing, excavations at the original Cooper homestead uncovered a remarkable artifact. The journal Hannah had begun during their wagon train journey and continued throughout their time. With Tallfeather preserved in a specially constructed cedar box, the document provided an intimate window into the transformation of two children, from desperate survivors to cultural bridge builders. The final entry, written in Hannah's steady hand just days before, the ambush that killed their parents, seemed prophetic in retrospect. Papa says we're heading toward a new life in the West. He says we might see things that change how we understand the world. I hope he's right. I want to learn everything I can about this new place and the people who know it best. That childish wish, born of innocent curiosity, had ultimately produced a legacy that would transform countless lives and challenge the deepest assumptions of a divided nation. From the darkest tragedy had emerged an unexpected light, proof that humanity's greatest wisdom often emerges precisely where different worlds meet, connect, and learn to honor each other's truths. The Cooper sisters' influence received renewed recognition during the Native American cultural revival movements of the 1960s and 1970s. Their meticulous preservation of traditional knowledge, maintained when such practices were actively suppressed through government policies, provided vital resources for tribes reclaiming their heritage. The Cheyenne Nation in particular acknowledged their debt to the sisters who had safeguarded healing traditions through the most devastating period of cultural disruption. In 1977, the Cooper Institute was designated a National Historic Landmark, recognizing its significance in American medical, scientific, and cultural history. The original buildings have been preserved as a museum, while the research and educational missions continue in expanded modern facilities nearby. The medicinal gardens, continuously maintained since Hannah and Sarah first planted them in the 1860s, contain some of the oldest documented medicinal plant collections in North America. Today, the Cooper Institute remains at the forefront of integrative medicine, ethnobotany, and cross-cultural healing studies. Researchers from around the world come to study the Cooper archives, which contain not only detailed pharmacological information, but wisdom about sustainable living, ecological balance, and respectful cultural exchange. And in a small, protected clearing near Shadow Falls, the place where two terrified children once fled from violence, a simple marker bears this inscription. Here began the journey of Hannah and Sarah Cooper, who learned that survival sometimes requires building bridges where others see only walls. May all who seek healing remember their courage and vision. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.